Captain Marcus Wellington spent the next hour examining the remaining contents of the trunk with growing amazement and horror. The final wrapped bundle contained what appeared to be operational plans for the Nazi invasion of Britain, annotated in Edward's own handwriting with suggestions for minimizing resistance and identifying key British officials who might be persuaded to collaborate. The plans were extraordinarily detailed, showing intimate knowledge of British defensive positions, military installations, and government facilities. Edward had apparently provided the Germans with intelligence that could have proven decisive in a successful invasion. Marcus realized he was looking at evidence that the former king had been not just a Nazi sympathizer, but an active German agent. Among the invasion plans, Marcus found maps of London marked with locations where Edward believed German forces would encounter the least resistance. Royal residences, government buildings, and military installations were all clearly marked with notations about their defensive capabilities and the loyalty of their personnel. The implications were staggering. Edward had been positioned to hand over his own country to its enemies, betraying not just his crown but every British citizen who had trusted him. The meticulous nature of his collaboration suggested that this was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a carefully planned and sustained act of treason. But the trunk held one final shock that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about the case. Hidden beneath the invasion plans, wrapped in the finest silk, he discovered a letter dated just 3 months earlier, September 1987. The letter was written in modern handwriting and signed by someone identifying themselves only as the Guardian. The letter explained that the trunk had been placed in the storage room deliberately, with the intention that it would eventually be discovered during routine maintenance. The Guardian claimed to be the last surviving member of a group of royal household staff who had worked for decades to preserve evidence of Edward's treachery while protecting the monarchy from immediate destruction. According to the letter, the original plan had been to reveal the truth gradually, allowing historians to discover documents that would slowly build a case against Edward without creating a sudden scandal that might bring down the entire royal institution. But the Guardian was now elderly and feared that without intervention, the evidence might be lost forever or destroyed by those who preferred to keep the secrets buried. The letter provided detailed instructions for Marcus on how to proceed with his discovery. It recommended that he contact specific historians and journalists who could be trusted to handle the material responsibly, ensuring that the truth emerged in a way that would serve historical accuracy without unnecessarily damaging the current royal family. Marcus realized that his discovery had not been accidental at all. He had been chosen, in a sense, to become the instrument through which one of the 20th century's greatest secrets would finally be revealed. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming, but he also felt a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. The letter from the Guardian also revealed the existence of additional evidence stored in other locations around the castle and beyond. Marcus learned that he had uncovered only a fraction of the material that documented Edward's collaboration with Nazi Germany. There were apparently safe deposit boxes, hidden archives, and even evidence stored in other royal residences that contained further proof of the conspiracy. As Marcus read through the Guardian's letter, he began to understand the complex moral calculations that had shaped the decades-long cover-up. The people who had preserved this evidence were not necessarily traitors to the crown, but individuals who believed that history deserved to know the truth, even if that truth was painful and destructive. The letter explained that many members of the royal household had known about Edward's activities during the war, but had been sworn to secrecy by a combination of official orders and personal loyalty to the institution of the monarchy. Some had struggled with their consciences for decades, knowing that they possessed evidence of extraordinary historical significance, but feeling bound by duty to keep silent. The Guardian had apparently been part of a small group that had worked to preserve evidence while the original participants in the cover-up gradually died off. By the 1980s, most of those who had direct knowledge of Edward's activities were gone, leaving only a handful of elderly staff members who had inherited the burden of keeping the secret. The decision to allow the trunk to be discovered represented a compromise between competing loyalties: loyalty to historical truth and loyalty to the crown. By arranging for the evidence to surface through routine maintenance rather than through a deliberate revelation, the Guardian hoped to provide some protection for the current royal family while ensuring that the truth would eventually emerge. Marcus spent the remainder of the afternoon carefully cataloging every item in the trunk and following the detailed instructions provided by the Guardian. He photographed everything from multiple angles, created detailed written descriptions of each document and object, and prepared secure storage for materials that would need to be preserved for historical analysis. The process was emotionally exhausting. With each new document Marcus examined, he gained a deeper appreciation for the complexity of the moral choices that had shaped this decades-long conspiracy of silence. The people involved were not simply villains or heroes, but human beings struggling with impossible decisions about loyalty, duty, and truth. As evening approached, Marcus contacted his supervisor and requested a private meeting to discuss his discovery. He knew that the next few hours would be crucial in determining how this explosive information would be handled. The wrong decision could either suppress historically vital information or unnecessarily damage institutions that millions of people respected and valued. Marcus also reached out to the historians and journalists recommended by The Guardian, beginning the process of ensuring that qualified experts would be involved in analyzing and presenting the evidence. He understood that his role was not to make decisions about how the information should be used, but to ensure that it reached people who could handle it responsibly. The trunk itself would need to be moved to a secure location where its contents could be properly preserved and studied. Marcus arranged for specialized archival storage that would protect the documents and objects from further deterioration while making them accessible to authorized researchers. As he prepared to leave the storage room where he had spent this extraordinary day, Marcus took one final look at the trunk that had changed his life and would soon change history. The morning had begun with a routine security inspection, but it had become the moment when one of the 20th century's most carefully guarded secrets finally began to see the light. The fog that had shrouded Windsor Castle that morning had lifted, revealing a clear November evening. Marcus felt as though the metaphorical fog surrounding Edward VIII's abdication was about to lift as well, exposing truths that had been hidden for over 50 years. Walking back through the castle corridors, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought this evidence to light. A maintenance worker's routine discovery had triggered a security inspection that had uncovered materials preserved by a dedicated group of individuals who had spent decades planning for this moment. The story was far from over. In fact, Marcus realized that his discovery represented only the beginning of what would likely become one of the most significant historical revelations of the modern era. The evidence he had found would need to be verified, analyzed, and contextualized by experts who could appreciate its full significance. But as he walked through the ancient halls of Windsor Castle, past portraits of monarchs who had ruled for centuries, Marcus felt certain that history would remember November 15th, 1987, as the day when truth finally triumphed over the most elaborate royal conspiracy of modern times. The trunk and its contents would ensure that future generations would know the complete truth about one of the most controversial figures in British royal history. The implications would ripple far beyond academic circles. The British people would finally learn that their former king had been willing to betray his country to Nazi Germany, and they would understand that their government and royal family had worked for decades to keep that betrayal secret. It would be a painful revelation, but Marcus believed that democratic societies were strong enough to survive the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to accept. As night fell over Windsor Castle, Marcus prepared to begin the process of bringing one of history's most explosive secrets into the light of public knowledge, forever changing how the world understood the relationship between duty, loyalty, and truth in the highest circles of British society. Captain Marcus Wellington's hands trembled slightly as he carefully untied the aged ribbon securing the first bundle of documents. The silk wrapping fell away to reveal a collection of papers that took his breath away. The topmost document bore the unmistakable seal of King Edward VIII, and the date showed December 1936, the very month of his abdication. The handwriting was clearly Edward's own, flowing script that Marcus recognized from historical documents he had studied during his security training. these were not official proclamations or state papers. These were personal letters, and the content that Marcus could see made his heart race with the implications of what he had discovered. The first letter was addressed to my dearest Wallace, and contained intimate details about Edward's struggle with his duty as king versus his love for Mrs. Simpson. But it was the second document that truly staggered Marcus, a detailed account, written in Edward's hand, of secret negotiations with Nazi officials that had taken place even after his abdication. Marcus photographed each document without fully removing them from their protective wrappings, his training overriding his curiosity. What he was seeing contradicted the official historical record in ways that could reshape understanding of one of the most significant periods in British royal history. The implications were staggering, and Marcus knew he was holding evidence of events that the royal family and the British government had worked for decades to keep secret. The diary entries detailed conversations about potential peace negotiations and even more disturbing references to Edward's belief that Britain would eventually need to seek accommodation with Nazi Germany. Marcus realized he was looking at evidence of what historians had long suspected but never proven, that the Duke of Windsor had maintained inappropriate contact with Nazi leadership well into World War II. But the documents were only part of the trunk's treasure trove. As Marcus carefully rewrapped the papers and turned his attention to the other silk-covered items, he discovered objects that added physical evidence to support the explosive written testimony. The first object proved to be an ornate silver cigarette case, engraved with both the royal coat of arms and a Nazi eagle. The combination of symbols was jarring and unmistakably significant. Marcus photographed the case from every angle, documenting what appeared to be a gift that no member of the British royal family should ever have possessed. Wrapped separately, Marcus found a collection of photographs that made his breath catch in his throat. The black and white images showed Edward and Wallace at what appeared to be social gatherings with high-ranking Nazi officials. In one particularly damning photograph, Edward was captured raising his arm in what looked unmistakably like a Nazi salute while standing beside Heinrich Himmler. The photographs were professionally taken and bore the stamp of a Berlin photography studio. Someone had clearly documented these meetings with the intention of preserving evidence of the encounters. Marcus wondered whether these images had been intended as insurance or blackmail material, or simply as records of historically significant meetings. As he continued his examination, Marcus discovered items that revealed the personal side of this historical drama. There were pieces of jewelry that appeared to be gifts from Nazi officials to Wallace Simpson, a diamond bracelet with an inscription in German, earrings featuring the Nazi eagle design worked subtly into their pattern. Each item Marcus uncovered added another layer to a story that grew more complex and troubling with every revelation. He began to understand that what he had found was not just historical evidence, but proof of a carefully orchestrated cover-up that had lasted for over 50 years. The trunk also contained financial documents that detailed payments made to Edward from German sources well after his abdication. The amounts were substantial, enough to maintain the lavish lifestyle that Edward and Wallace enjoyed during their exile in France and later in the Bahamas. Marcus photographed a letter from a Swiss bank confirming the transfer of funds from accounts linked to the Nazi Party directly to Edward's personal accounts. The letter was dated 1940, when Britain was fighting for its survival against Nazi Germany. The irony and betrayal implicit in these financial arrangements was overwhelming. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came when Marcus finally investigated the false bottom he had detected in the trunk's construction. Using a thin blade from his toolkit, he carefully pried up the wooden panel to reveal a hidden compartment containing items that someone had deemed too dangerous to store with the other materials. The hidden compartment contained a signed agreement between Edward and Nazi officials outlining his role in a potential German occupation of Britain. The document was dated September 1940, at the height of the Battle of Britain, when the Royal Air Force was fighting desperately to prevent a German invasion. According to the agreement, Edward would be restored to the throne as a puppet monarch under German control once Britain was defeated. In exchange, he would ensure that resistance to German occupation was minimized and that key British officials cooperated with the new regime. The document bore Edward's signature alongside those of several high-ranking Nazi officials. It was perhaps the most treasonous document in British history, proof that a former king had been willing to collaborate with his country's enemies during its darkest hour. Marcus sat back on his heels, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had discovered. These were not just historical curiosities or embarrassing family secrets. These were documents and objects that proved the former King Edward VIII had committed acts that by any definition constituted high treason against the British crown and people. The implications extended far beyond Edward himself. The careful preservation and concealment of these materials suggested that other members of the royal family, and possibly government officials, had known about Edward's treachery and had worked to cover it up. Marcus realized that his discovery could potentially bring down the monarchy if the full extent of the cover-up became public. The British people had been told that Edward abdicated solely because of his desire to marry Wallis Simpson. They had never been informed that their former king had actively collaborated with Nazi Germany against his own country. As he continued documenting his finds, Marcus discovered correspondence that revealed the involvement of other royal family members in managing the scandal. Letters from the future King George VI showed that he was aware of his brother's Nazi connections and was actively working to prevent the information from becoming public. There were also documents indicating that Winston Churchill himself had been involved in the cover-up, despite his later reputation as the man who saved Britain from Nazi tyranny. Churchill had apparently decided that protecting the reputation of the monarchy was more important than revealing Edward's treachery to the British people. The trunk contained evidence of a conspiracy that reached to the very highest levels of British society and government. Marcus understood that he was not just looking at historical documents, but at proof of one of the most successful cover-ups in modern history. As the afternoon light began to fade in the storage room, Marcus continued his meticulous documentation. Every photograph he took, every note he made, was potentially evidence in a case that could rewrite British history. The weight of responsibility was enormous, and Marcus knew that the decisions made about these materials in the coming hours and days would have far-reaching consequences. The trunk still held more secrets. Marcus could see additional wrapped items in its depths, and he suspected that what he had discovered so far was only the beginning. The question that haunted him was how this explosive material had ended up hidden in a storage room at Windsor Castle, and who had made the decision to preserve these damning documents rather than destroy them. As he prepared to examine the remaining contents of the trunk, Marcus knew that his life had been irrevocably changed. He had stumbled upon one of the most significant historical discoveries of the 20th century, and now he faced the challenge of deciding what to do with knowledge that could shake the very foundations of the British establishment. Captain Marcus Wellington had served the royal family for 15 years, but nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for what he would find on that cold November morning in 1987. The fog hung thick over Windsor Castle's east wing as he made his routine security rounds, his polished boots echoing against the ancient stone corridors. The call had come in at dawn. A maintenance worker reported finding an old trunk in the castle's storage rooms during renovation work on the Queen's private quarters. Standard protocol required all unidentified items to undergo thorough security inspection before removal or disposal. Marcus had handled hundreds of such cases over the years: forgotten furniture, outdated equipment, abandoned personal belongings from long-departed staff members. This particular trunk sat in the corner of a musty storage room that hadn't been opened in decades. Dust particles danced in the weak morning light filtering through a grimy window. The trunk itself appeared unremarkable at first glance. Dark leather with brass fittings, showing significant wear from age and neglect. No visible markings or identifying features caught his immediate attention. Marcus pulled on his inspection gloves and approached the trunk carefully. His training emphasized methodical examination of any suspicious items. The leather surface felt dry and cracked under his touch. The brass locks had developed a green patina typical of old copper alloys exposed to moisture over many years. He noted the craftsmanship appeared high quality, suggesting the trunk had once belonged to someone of considerable means. Before attempting to open the container, Marcus conducted his standard external examination. He checked for any wires, unusual weight distribution, or signs of tampering that might indicate security concerns. The trunk measured approximately 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 18 inches deep. Its weight suggested substantial contents, but nothing felt loose or shifted when he carefully tilted it. The lock mechanism showed no signs of recent manipulation. Marcus retrieved his specialized tools from his security kit and began working on the ancient brass fastenings. The first lock opened with surprising ease, as if it had been well maintained despite its age. The second lock proved more challenging, requiring several minutes of careful work with his picks. As the final lock clicked open, Marcus felt an unexpected sense of anticipation. His years of experience had taught him to expect the mundane: old clothes, outdated documents, forgotten household items. Yet something about this particular trunk felt different. Perhaps it was the quality of its construction or the care with which someone had once secured its contents. Marcus lifted the heavy lid slowly, prepared for anything from musty fabric to deteriorated papers. Instead, he found himself staring at layers of carefully preserved silk wrapping. The fabric appeared to be of exceptional quality, deep burgundy in color with gold threading that still gleamed despite the passage of time. Someone had taken great care to protect whatever lay beneath these elegant coverings. He photographed the trunk's contents before disturbing anything, following standard documentation procedures. The silk wrappings were arranged in precise layers, suggesting methodical packing by someone who understood the value of the contents. Marcus noted the absence of any obvious deterioration or pest damage, indicating the trunk had been stored in relatively stable conditions. Carefully lifting the first layer of silk, Marcus discovered what appeared to be official documents wrapped in protective oilcloth. The papers were bound with ribbon that had once been white but had aged to a cream color. Through the translucent protective covering, he could make out formal calligraphy and what looked like official seals. Beneath the document bundle, more silk wrapping concealed additional items. Marcus could feel the outline of something rectangular and substantial, possibly a book or portfolio. There were also several smaller objects of varying shapes wrapped individually in the precious fabric. The musty storage room suddenly felt charged with historical significance. Marcus realized he might be the first person to examine these items in many decades. His pulse quickened as he considered the possibilities. Royal storage rooms had yielded remarkable discoveries before: forgotten artworks, historical documents, personal effects of long-dead monarchs. Marcus decided to conduct his preliminary examination in situ before removing anything from the trunk. He activated his portable examination light and positioned it to illuminate the contents without casting harsh shadows. The silk wrappings appeared to be museum quality, suggesting whoever had packed these items understood their historical or monetary value. The official documents demanded his immediate attention. Through the protective covering, Marcus could see elaborate calligraphy and what appeared to be multiple wax seals. One seal in particular caught his eye. It bore markings that looked remarkably similar to the royal coat of arms, though from this angle, he couldn't be certain of the details. As he photographed each layer of the discovery, Marcus noticed something peculiar about the trunk's construction. The interior dimensions seemed smaller than the exterior measurements would suggest. Running his fingers along the interior walls, he detected what felt like a false bottom or hidden compartment. His experience with security inspections had taught him to look for concealed spaces that might harbor additional surprises. The possibility of a hidden compartment added another layer of intrigue to his discovery. Marcus made detailed notes about the trunk's construction and the arrangement of its visible contents. He would need to proceed with extreme caution, especially if these items proved to have historical significance. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting stronger light through the storage room window. Marcus checked his watch and realized he had been examining the trunk for over an hour. His thorough approach was paying dividends. Every detail he documented now might prove crucial later. Before proceeding further, Marcus contacted his supervisor to report the discovery of potentially significant historical materials. Royal protocol required immediate notification when items of possible historical importance were uncovered during routine operations. His supervisor instructed him to continue his examination, but to document everything meticulously before removing any items from their current location. Marcus returned to the trunk with renewed focus. The silk wrappings seemed to whisper secrets from another era as he carefully photographed their arrangement. Each fold and crease told a story of careful preservation, of someone who understood they were safeguarding items of tremendous importance. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as Marcus prepared to unwrap the first bundle of documents. Whatever lay beneath these protective coverings had been important enough for someone to preserve with extraordinary care. The question that nagged at him was simple yet profound. What could be so significant that it required such elaborate concealment in the depths of Windsor Castle? As he reached for the ribbon binding the document bundle, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something that would change everything he thought he knew about the royal family's history. The trunk had already proven to contain far more than anyone had anticipated. Now, as he prepared to reveal its deepest secrets, Marcus understood that this cold November morning might become one of the most significant days of his career. The silence in the storage room felt profound as Marcus prepared to make his next discovery. Outside, the normal sounds of castle life continued, staff members going about their duties, groundskeepers tending the gardens, tourists gathering for the morning tours. None of them knew that in a forgotten corner of the East Wing, history was about to reveal one of its most carefully guarded secrets.